They told themselves they were in control, but last night, something inside them broke. What they tried to suppress is now rising with force, and it's all connected to you. Have you felt it too? That strange pull, that unspoken tension. Stay with me, because what you're about to understand will change how you see this connection forever. Subscribe now before this message disappears. Like this video if you feel this energy. Comment "I understand" if this resonates with you. Stay till the end, because the final truth is coming. There are forces within the human psyche that do not obey the will of the conscious mind. These forces do not respond to intention, nor do they dissolve simply because they are ignored. Instead, they exist beneath the surface, gathering form and intensity over time, waiting for the moment when they can no longer remain contained. What is often perceived as sudden emotional overwhelm is rarely sudden at all. It is the result of something that has been building in silence. In this case, what they are experiencing is not the creation of new feeling, but the eruption of what was previously suppressed. Suppression is not the same as absence. When a feeling is suppressed, it is not eliminated. It is merely pushed out of conscious awareness. The mind does this as a protective mechanism, particularly when the emotion is too complex, too intense, or too disruptive to be easily integrated at the time it arises. It is placed into the unconscious, where it remains active, though unseen. But the unconscious is not a passive space. It is dynamic, alive, and constantly interacting with the conscious mind in subtle ways. Suppressed emotions do not remain static. They evolve. They attach themselves to memories, to symbols, to associations. They deepen, forming connections that were not initially visible. And over time they accumulate energy. This accumulation does not go on indefinitely without consequence. There comes a point when the pressure becomes too great, when the boundary between the unconscious and the conscious mind begins to weaken. And when this boundary weakens, what has been suppressed begins to surface. Not gradually, but often all at once. This is what creates the feeling of being overwhelmed, of losing control, of experiencing emotions that seem disproportionate to the present moment. But the intensity does not belong solely to the present. It carries the weight of everything that has been held back. For this person, their feelings for you were not fully acknowledged when they first emerged. Perhaps they minimized them, convincing themselves that they were not significant. Perhaps they avoided them, focusing instead on other aspects of life. Or perhaps they recognized them but chose not to act on them, believing it was easier or safer to maintain distance. In any case, the result was the same. The feelings were not integrated, and because they were not integrated, they did not resolve. They remained beneath the surface, continuing to exist, continuing to develop, even in the absence of conscious attention. This is where the complexity deepens, because what is suppressed does not remain in its original form. It changes. It becomes layered, influenced by time, by reflection, by imagination. It may become idealized, intensified, or even distorted. But regardless of its transformation, its core remains intact. And that core is now emerging. What they are feeling is not just the present emotion. It is the cumulative force of everything that was not expressed, not explored, not understood. It is the past and the present converging into a single experience. This is why it feels uncontrollable, because it is not a single feeling that can be easily managed. It is a complex structure of emotions, all surfacing at once, demanding recognition. And recognition is precisely what it seeks. The psyche does not bring something into awareness without purpose. When suppressed material rises, it does so because there is something that needs to be seen, something that needs to be understood. It is an attempt at integration, a movement toward wholeness. But this process can be disorienting, because it disrupts the sense of order that the person has relied upon. It challenges their previous understanding of themselves, of their emotions, of their connection to you. It introduces a level of intensity that cannot be easily explained or controlled. They may try to resist it, to push it back down, to regain control. to restore the sense of stability they once had. But once something has reached the threshold of conscious awareness, it cannot be fully suppressed again. It has already crossed the boundary. And now, it demands engagement. This does not mean that they immediately understand what they are feeling. In fact, confusion is often the first response, a sense of being overwhelmed without clear direction. But beneath that confusion lies something very precise, a truth that is beginning to take shape, a truth about how deeply they feel, a truth about what you represent to them, and a truth about what they can no longer ignore. This is the nature of emotional eruption. It is not chaos without meaning. It is meaning that has been delayed, and now that it has surfaced, it begins to influence everything. Their thoughts become centered around it. Their attention returns to you, not by choice, but by necessity. Their internal world reorganizes itself around this emerging awareness, because once something becomes conscious, it changes the structure of the psyche. It can no longer be dismissed as irrelevant. It becomes part of the self that must be acknowledged, understood, and eventually integrated. And until that process is complete, the intensity remains, not as something to be feared, but as something to be faced, because what has emerged is not random. It is the truth of what they feel, and for the first time, they are no longer able to look away. There exists within every individual a system of inner regulation, an arrangement of beliefs, habits, and emotional boundaries that work together to maintain a sense of stability. This system does not arise by accident. It is formed over time, shaped by experience, by necessity, and often by the need to protect oneself from emotional disruption. Through this system, a person learns how to contain their reactions, how to present themselves in a composed and predictable way, and how to navigate the world without becoming overwhelmed by what they feel. This is what gives rise to the sense of control. But this control is not absolute. It is constructed, and like all constructions, it depends on the strength of its foundations. When the emotional force it is meant to regulate remains within certain limits, the system functions effectively. It filters, organizes, and contains. It allows the person to feel without being overtaken. However, when an emotion exceeds those limits, when it carries a depth or intensity that the system was never designed to manage, the structure begins to strain. At first, this strain is barely noticeable. Small inconsistencies begin to appear, a thought that lingers longer than it should, a reaction that feels slightly stronger than expected, a moment of distraction where attention drifts towards something that had previously been set aside. These are subtle signals, often dismissed or overlooked, because they do not yet disrupt the overall sense of order. But they are the beginning of a shift. As the emotional intensity continues to grow, the system is forced to work harder to maintain control. It begins to rely more heavily on its defenses, rationalization, avoidance, suppression. The person tells themselves that what they are feeling is not important, that it will pass, that it does not require attention. They reinforce their existing narrative, trying to keep everything within familiar boundaries. Yet beneath this effort, something continues to build. Because control, when it is used to contain rather than to understand, does not resolve emotion, it delays it. And what is delayed does not disappear. It accumulates. This accumulation creates pressure, not immediately visible, but steadily increasing. The more the person tries to maintain control without addressing the underlying feeling, the more tension develops within the system. And tension, when sustained over time, begins to weaken the very structures that were meant to contain it. This is the point at which the collapse begins, not as a sudden breakdown, but as a gradual erosion of control. The defenses that once seemed reliable begin to lose their effectiveness. Rational explanations no longer fully convince. Distractions no longer fully occupy the mind. The ability to suppress becomes less consistent, less stable. And in these moments, the underlying emotion begins to break through. It appears unexpectedly, during quiet moments in the middle of unrelated thoughts, in reactions that seem disproportionate to the situation. The person may find themselves thinking of you without intending to, feeling something they cannot easily explain, experiencing a depth of emotion that does not align with their conscious efforts to remain composed. This is not failure. It is the system reaching its limit, because no structure of control can indefinitely contain something that demands to be felt. The psyche is not designed to function through suppression alone. It requires integration, understanding, and expression. Without these, control becomes fragile, and once fragility sets in, collapse becomes inevitable. For this person, their emotional control was built on the belief that what they felt could be managed, minimized, or set aside. They trusted in their ability to maintain distance from it, to keep it within boundaries that allowed them to continue without disruption. But what they feel for you does not fit within those boundaries. It exceeds them, and because it exceeds them, it exposes the limitations of the control they once relied upon. It reveals that their system was never equipped to fully contain something of this depth. This realization can be unsettling, because it challenges their sense of identity. To believe that one is in control and then to experience that control weakening creates a kind of internal disorientation. It forces them to confront the fact that there are aspects of themselves that operate beyond their conscious command. They may resist this realization. They may attempt to rebuild the structure, to reinforce their defenses, to regain the sense of stability they once had. But once a system has begun to collapse, it cannot simply return to its previous form. The conditions that allowed it to function have changed. And so, a transformation becomes necessary. Not a return to control as it once was, but a movement toward a different kind of stability, one that does not rely solely on containment, but on understanding. Because true stability is not achieved by suppressing emotion, but by integrating it. This is the stage they are entering now, a stage where control is no longer sufficient, where the old methods no longer work, and where something deeper must take place. They are being pushed not by external force, but by their own inner experience to confront what they feel. And this confrontation is not optional, because the collapse of control has already begun. What remains is the process of facing what has emerged, of allowing it to be seen, of understanding its meaning. Only through this can a new form of balance be established, one that is not fragile, not dependent on avoidance, but rooted in awareness. Until then, the instability continues, not as chaos, but as transition, a movement away from illusion, and towards something real, something undeniable, something they can no longer hold back. Within the human psyche, there is often a division that is rarely acknowledged, yet constantly active, a division between what one knows and what one feels. This division is not inherently problematic. In fact, it allows for balance. Reason provides structure, orientation, and predictability, while feeling brings depth, meaning, and connection. When these two aspects are in alignment, a person experiences a sense of coherence, an inner harmony that guides both thought and action. But when they fall out of alignment, conflict emerges. This conflict is not always visible from the outside. A person may continue to act rationally, to make decisions that appear logical, to maintain a sense of composure that suggests everything is under control. Yet internally, there is tension, a quiet but persistent opposition between the conclusions of the mind and the impulses of the heart. This is the state they now inhabit. On one side, there is reason. Reason constructs a narrative based on facts, circumstances, and prior decisions. It evaluates what is practical, what is appropriate, what aligns with the identity they have built for themselves. It reminds them of why certain boundaries were created, why certain paths were chosen, why it might be safer or more consistent to maintain distance. Reason seeks stability. It prefers what is known, what is predictable, what can be justified. It operates through clarity and control, attempting to organize experience into something that can be understood and managed. But on the other side, there is feeling. And feeling does not operate in the same way. It does not rely on justification. It does not concern itself with what is practical or convenient. It emerges from a deeper layer of the psyche, one that is connected to meaning rather than logic. And when it is strong, it does not ask for permission. It simply exists. This is what creates the conflict, because what they feel for you does not align with what they believe they should feel. It does not fit neatly into the narrative that reason has constructed. It disrupts the sense of order, introducing something that cannot be easily explained or contained. At first, they may try to resolve this conflict through reasoning. They may attempt to reinterpret their feelings, to reduce their significance, to place them within a framework that makes them less disruptive. They may tell themselves that it is temporary, that it is influenced by circumstance, that it does not reflect something deeper. But feeling resists this kind of reduction, because it is not derived from thought. It is experienced directly, and when it is genuine, it carries a weight that cannot be dismissed by explanation alone. As the feeling persists, the conflict intensifies. Reason begins to lose its certainty. The arguments that once seemed convincing start to feel incomplete. Doubt enters the structure, not necessarily doubt about the facts, but doubt about whether those facts fully capture the truth of the situation. At the same time, the feeling becomes more defined. What was once vague begins to take shape. It becomes clearer, more specific, more difficult to ignore. It starts to influence their attention, drawing them toward memories, toward reflections, toward you. It creates a kind of inner gravity that reason cannot fully counteract. This is where the tension reaches its peak, because both sides are active, both demanding recognition, both refusing to yield. The person finds themselves in a state of inner division, where no single perspective feels complete on its own. This division can be deeply unsettling, because it challenges the sense of unity within the self. To experience two opposing forces at once is to feel fragmented, as though one's inner world is no longer cohesive. It introduces uncertainty, not just about the situation, but about oneself. They may ask themselves questions they cannot easily answer. Why do I feel this way? Why now? Why does it persist despite everything I tell myself? And beneath these questions lies a deeper realization. That feeling may be revealing something that reason has not yet fully understood. This is the turning point. Because while reason seeks to maintain control, feeling seeks to reveal truth, not a truth that can always be articulated immediately, but one that must be experienced before it can be understood. In many cases, it is feeling that leads and reason that must follow, not by abandoning logic, but by expanding it, by allowing it to incorporate what is being felt rather than attempting to override it. This requires a shift, a willingness to move beyond rigid structures and to engage with the complexity of the inner experience. For this person, that shift is beginning. The conflict they are experiencing is not meaningless. It is not simply confusion or instability. It is the psyche attempting to reconcile two aspects of itself that have not yet been integrated. Reason is being challenged to evolve. Feeling is demanding to be acknowledged, and between them, a new understanding is trying to emerge. But this process takes time, because integration does not happen instantly. It requires reflection, honesty, and a willingness to face what may not align with previous beliefs. It involves allowing the tension to exist without immediately resolving it, trusting that clarity will come through engagement rather than avoidance. Until that clarity is reached, the conflict remains, not as a sign of failure, but as a sign of depth. Because only when something truly matters does it create this level of inner opposition. Only when a feeling carries real significance does it have the power to challenge reason so completely. And so they remain within this tension, pulled between what they think and what they feel, between the structure of the mind and the truth of the heart. And somewhere within that tension, something is changing. Something that will eventually require a decision, not based on logic alone, but on what they can no longer deny. There is a profound tension that arises within the human psyche when one confronts vulnerability, when the protective barriers that shape identity begin to weaken, and the individual becomes aware of forces that operate beyond conscious control. Vulnerability is not simply exposure. It is the recognition that one's internal world, thoughts, emotions, and desires, is no longer fully containable. It is a space in which certainty dissolves, and in which the self encounters the rawness of feeling that has been long suppressed or carefully regulated. For this person, the feelings they harbor for you are reaching precisely this threshold. For years, they may have relied on internal defenses to maintain equilibrium. These defenses take many forms: rationalization, detachment, avoidance, even a habitual distancing from what stirs the heart. Through these mechanisms, they could project a sense of stability, a sense that their life, their choices, and their emotions were manageable. But these defenses, however skillful, are not infallible. They are adaptive structures, not absolute truths, and when an emotion grows beyond the capacity of these structures, they begin to crumble. The emotion at play here is not casual or fleeting. It carries a depth that touches the core of their inner experience. It is an attachment not only to the person you are, but also to the meaning they derive from your presence, the recognition, the resonance, the awakening of parts of themselves that previously lay dormant. These layers of experience cannot be suppressed indefinitely, and the psyche, when faced with such intensity, will inevitably assert itself. This assertion often manifests as a loss of control, a feeling that emerges spontaneously, uncontrollably, and unbidden, pushing them into a confrontation with what they had hoped to manage quietly. When one loses control over their emotions, there is a sense of destabilization that accompanies it. It is not merely a fluctuation of feeling, but a disturbance in the entire internal ecosystem. Thoughts, memories, and perceptions are filtered through this rising tide of emotion, reshaping how they interpret the world. Ordinary stimuli become charged. Mundane experiences evoke unexpected responses. Their awareness narrows, not in a negative sense, but in a way that draws them toward the source of what they feel, toward you. This process can be disorienting because it challenges their long-held sense of identity. Identity is constructed, in part, through consistency, through the alignment of thought, action, and emotion. When emotion overwhelms this alignment, the individual experiences an internal fragmentation, a feeling that the familiar sense of self is no longer fully reliable. There is discomfort in this, but there is also insight. Vulnerability, in its raw form, exposes truth. It reveals what matters, what has been suppressed, and what cannot be avoided. They may feel fear at this point, not fear of you, but fear of themselves, fear of what it means to be so affected, so influenced, so incapable of restraint, fear that their emotions may compel actions or admissions that were previously unthinkable. This fear is a marker of the magnitude of what they feel. It is the psyche signaling that this is significant, that this is transformative, and that this cannot remain hidden. Yet within this fear is also a form of liberation. To lose control over emotion is to encounter honesty within oneself. It is to acknowledge what was once denied, minimized, or rationalized away. And while the experience can feel destabilizing, it is also profoundly clarifying. It forces the individual to confront the reality of their connection to you, not as a concept or an abstraction, but as a force that actively shapes their internal world. This confrontation is an invitation. It calls them to reconcile their feelings with their identity, to integrate what has arisen into a coherent understanding of self. It asks them to recognize that control, while adaptive, cannot substitute for truth. They are being asked to embrace the depth of what they feel, to allow it to exist without shame or avoidance, and to navigate their life with this new awareness. In doing so, they move toward a deeper form of emotional maturity. They learn that vulnerability is not weakness. It is engagement with the truth of experience. It teaches that emotions, when understood rather than suppressed, provide guidance, insight, and clarity. And it reveals that their connection to you is not merely a fleeting attraction, but an encounter with something that resonates profoundly within their psyche. Until this process is fully realized, the tension remains. They are caught between the desire for control and the inevitability of feeling, between the safety of avoidance and the clarity of acknowledgement, between the past they attempted to regulate and the present they can no longer ignore. And within this tension, the truth of their emotions asserts itself persistently, irresistibly, and undeniably. Because losing control over feelings is not failure, it is the emergence of reality. And reality, in its purest form, demands recognition, it demands acknowledgement, it demands honesty, and ultimately, it demands transformation.